In the dusty little town that sat between the mountains and the wide open prairie, people gathered around the depot whenever a stagecoach arrived. For in a place as quiet as that, any stranger was a reason to whisper. That morning the whispers turned into laughter and pointing fingers when a tall, proud young woman stepped off the coach with her trunk and a face set hard against tears. She had been brought there weeks earlier as a mail-order bride, a bargain between her desperate family and a wealthy rancher who believed a woman ought to be quiet, obedient, and grateful for the roof over her head. But this woman was none of those things. Her name was Clara, and she had a fire in her spirit, the kind that made her argue when something felt wrong, that made her stand tall when others expected her to bow, and that made her speak the truth even when silence was safer. The rancher who had ordered her soon found her too much to handle. He called her stubborn, unfit to be a wife, a problem instead of a blessing, and after only a few weeks he sent her back like she was a package gone wrong. The stagecoach driver dropped her in town with nothing more than a letter of dismissal in her pocket, and when she lifted her chin to face the crowd, she could feel the sting of humiliation pressing down, but she refused to break. People muttered cruel things, too mouthy, a shame for a woman not to know her place. No wonder he sent her back. But Clara only tightened her jaw and kept walking, dragging her trunk across the dirt road, determined that she would not show weakness. Not now, not ever. She might not know where she belonged, but she would not beg to be wanted. That was when he saw her, at the far end of the street. Leaning against the post outside the blacksmith's, stood a cowboy with a strong frame, sun-darkened skin, and eyes that carried both weariness and humor. His name was Daniel McGraw, known around town as a man who worked hard, fought harder, and trusted few. He'd built his ranch from nothing after years of cattle drives and storms that took more from him than he cared to remember. He didn't believe in fairy tales or in fragile wives who needed constant tending, but when his gaze fell on Clara, her defiance caught something deep inside him. She wasn't pretty in the delicate way many admired. She was striking because she held herself like someone who refused to be broken. Daniel overheard the whispers, the mocking laughter, and he saw her clutch that letter in her fist like it was a battle flag. Most men would have turned away, seeing trouble where they longed for peace. But Daniel saw exactly the opposite. He saw a woman who wouldn't quit, a woman who could face down storms with her head high, a woman who reminded him of the land itself, unyielding, stubborn, and strong. He pushed off the post and walked toward her, his boots thudding against the dirt. His eyes locked on her as if he'd already made up his mind. Clara noticed him right away, and she tensed, ready for another insult or another demand that she soften her ways. "I suppose you've heard the story too," she said coldly, gripping her trunk tighter. Daniel tilted his head, his lips curving into the faintest smile. "I've heard," he said. "They say you're stubborn. Too stubborn to be any man's wife." Clara lifted her chin higher, her eyes flashing. "If stubborn means not bowing to cruelty, then yes. If it means not being silenced, then yes. If it means fighting for my dignity, then I'll never apologize for it." She expected him to laugh at her or walk away, but instead he stepped closer, his voice dropping low and steady. "Good," he said simply. "That's exactly what I need." The words stunned her. For weeks she had been told that her fire was a flaw, that her will was too heavy a burden, that no man would ever want a woman who dared to hold her ground. And now this cowboy stood before her, saying it was precisely the thing he was searching for. She blinked at him, uncertain, suspicious even, because men often said what they didn't mean. But Daniel's eyes were steady, his tone firm, and in that moment, Clara realized this man wasn't mocking her. He meant it. The crowd around them quieted, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. And for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, Clara felt the weight of humiliation lift from her shoulders. Someone saw her not as a problem, but as a solution. Someone saw her stubbornness not as a curse, but as a strength. The sun hung higher in the sky as Daniel took Clara's trunk from her hand and hoisted it easily onto his shoulder, ignoring the gasps from townsfolk who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. He didn't care what they thought. He never had. "Come on," he said, nodding toward his horse tethered nearby. "Let's get you off this street. Folks round here don't deserve the satisfaction of watching you squirm." Clara hesitated. She didn't know this man, didn't know his intentions, and her pride screamed at her not to follow blindly. "Why would you bother?" she asked, her voice sharp. "You don't know me. You don't know what kind of trouble I might bring." Daniel looked at her, his jaw set, his eyes calm. "I know enough. I know you've got grit. I know you won't fold when things get hard, and I need someone like that. Life out on the ranch doesn't take kindly to the faint of heart." As they rode out together, Clara sitting tall in the saddle of her own horse, because Daniel had insisted she ride, not sit behind him like baggage. She felt the prairie winds whipping against her hair, a taste of freedom she hadn't known in years. He didn't treat her like glass. He didn't demand her silence. He rode beside her, steady, respectful and quiet, as though her stubborn presence was enough to steady him too. At the ranch, Daniel showed her the spread of land he had worked for years, the endless fences, the barn weathered by storms, the cattle grazing under the hot sun. "This land fights me every day," he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "The storms, the droughts, the wolves, everything tries to take it from me. I need someone who won't back down, someone who's too stubborn to quit." He glanced at her, and for the first time since leaving her family, Clara's heart beat with something like hope. Days turned into weeks, and Clara proved exactly what Daniel had seen in her. She worked alongside him, not as a servant but as a partner. When storms came, she held the barn doors fast against the wind. When cattle scattered, she rode hard to bring them back. And when neighbors came sneering, suggesting Daniel had lost his mind to take back a woman returned by another man, Clara stood tall at his side, her chin lifted, her eyes blazing, daring anyone to challenge her worth. Each night, as they sat by the fire, Daniel would glance at her with quiet pride, the kind that needed no words. And though he never showered her with flowery speeches, Clara realized that his actions spoke louder. He trusted her, he relied on her, and he never once tried to change the fire that burned within her. In time, the town stopped laughing. They saw the ranch thriving stronger than ever. They saw Daniel steadier, stronger and happier with Clara by his side. And most of all, they saw Clara transformed not into something softer, but into something even more radiant, because she had finally found a place where her stubborn heart was not only accepted but celebrated. The same stubbornness that had once been a curse was now the very reason. She was loved. She had been returned, humiliated, unwanted, and yet, in the hands of the right man, she had become a treasure. Daniel often said in his quiet, steady way, "You were never too much. Clara, you were just waiting for the man who needed exactly what you are." And those words stayed with her like a promise, carved into stone. And so the bride once returned for being too stubborn became the woman who built a life on grit, courage, and love that burned steady as the western sun. And for every person listening to this story, remember this: sometimes the very thing the world calls your weakness is the very thing that makes you strong. Don't let anyone tell you to dim your fire. The right people will see it. The right people will cherish it. And the right people will say, "That's exactly what I need." If this story touched your heart, if you believe in strength, grit, and finding the one who values your true self, make sure to subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories that remind you never to give up on who you are.